Okay, welcome everybody to week 10. So this week we're going to be talking about maintaining motivation. Okay, so just a few announcements. So the lesson plan assignment, so you guys pretty much all voted to do the lesson plan assignment instead of the last two reading quizzes. So I'll be posting that this week. I meant to do it last week, but I couldn't. It took me a lot longer to find the materials than I originally thought it would. So I'm writing up the instructions now, and so you should have it no later than tomorrow at the latest. Okay, so just be on the lookout for that, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. I'll include a video explaining it as well. Yeah, so your proposals are graded. I can't remember if I mentioned this last week or not, but so make sure to take a look at the feedback. Some of you, so some of the feedback shows that I wanted you to rethink your topic a little bit more. So once you do that, I need you to return it to me so I can give you more feedback on it, okay? So try and do that by Friday. And then Skype meeting. So for your final projects, you'll have to meet with me on Skype. Not the week after spring break, but the following week. Okay, so so under this week's lesson, there's going to be a Skype or a Google document, a link to one that you can use to sign up for a time. So make sure to do that. It's a 6-hour difference between Hawaii and Boston right now, so you'll need to. So that limits the time a little bit. So if it's difficult for you to meet with me during those times, just email me and let me know, and we'll work something out. But the Skype meeting is definitely required for the final project. Okay, so moving into the key part of this week's lecture. So let's see. We talked a few weeks ago, so you read Dornier chapter 3 on generating motivation, right? So this chapter is basically talking about how we maintain motivation. Okay, so it's not enough just to generate it. You have to make sure that you keep the fire lit, essentially. Okay, so I mean, you can get a pot of water to boil, but without keeping the burner going, it's not going to keep boiling. So the same thing kind of goes with motivation. So if you don't have strategies in place to kind of keep that going, then your learners are going to lose steam pretty quickly. And so there's a lot of different strategies that we can use that Dornier mentions specifically in this chapter. It's a very long chapter, you'll notice, but I think it's a very useful one to read. So generally the classroom is boring. We know this from experience. So it's boring and work is viewed as to be a chore. And I think it's worth mentioning. So he actually mentions that this is kind of ironic because researchers and practitioners all agree. So everything points to the fact that the classroom should be exciting to promote motivation, but it's not the case. So, and some of the reasons for this. So, for one thing, many teachers believe that learning should be hard work. Okay, so they actually believe that they should be making everything kind of more difficult for the learners to kind of get them to work to learn it more, and so that can actually be demotivating. There's been a shift in focus from process to product. So teachers, because of a new focus on testing and assessment, so teachers have started focusing more on, so what's the outcome of the learning as measured by these assessments rather than what's going on during the learning. So they don't pay as much attention to the types of strategies that they're putting into the classroom. All they care is that, all they seem to be caring about is that the learners are demonstrating some advancement in the topic, okay? Because it's not that the teachers don't care about the learners, it's just that the way that the curriculum currently is, it doesn't allow them to spend a lot of time dealing with what's going on in the process. And another thing, so not everything can be interesting all the time. So we all know this. You may start off, your motivation or your interests will really peak at different times in the semester based on what you're talking about. There's that, and then you have a lot of different interests and preferences that are represented in each classroom. So different learners will have different things that they're interested about at different times. So really the key question here is then, so what can we do? Okay, so how can we actually make it so that the learning is more enjoyable and that learners can actually maintain this level of motivation that we work so hard at achieving at the beginning of a class. So one thing that Donia mentioned is breaking the monotony of learning. Okay, so we don't want it to be something that is like done over and over again. You want to vary as many aspects of the learning situation as possible. Okay, so as a teacher, I can say I'm guilty of this. You find yourself very much like in a routine after a while, and so it's not that we don't want to be more creative. It just has to do with time constraints and kind of figuring out. So this is what are some of the best ways to organize the class and get the information across to the students, basically. How can we get them to work with it? So a lot of times teachers will settle into a routine, which can be really boring for everybody involved. So it makes it so the teachers can't be as creative anymore. It makes it so the learners just kind of always know what to expect, so there's nothing new. And so he basically says, so we need to change that. Okay, so we can actually vary the tasks themselves. So we can look at different linguistic foci. So so he gives an example of like doing grammar one time and then sociocultural focuses another time. So pragmatics, looking at how the grammar changes from one situation to the other. That might be something that's fun for learners to consider. Changing language skills focus. So at one point doing writing and another point doing speaking. The channel of communication. So how are we actually conveying this information to students? How are we having them work? Are we having them do worksheets? Are we having them do picture drawing? Are we how are we presenting the information? Is it in the PowerPoint? Is it through just a lecture where we stand in front of the students? It's fine. I mean, all of these work, but it's something that the idea is that you want to change it up every once in a while. Okay, and then the organizational format. So how are we actually organizing the activities, essentially? Okay, so the other thing that we can change and vary is the teaching style. So the tasks themselves can be changed, and so can the teaching style. So that can be with the presentation style. So how are we actually presenting the information? Is it always through PowerPoint? Is it always through lecture? Are we the ones in the front always teaching, or are the students working together in groups? We have learning materials. So do we always just give worksheets? Do we give handouts? What do the handouts have on them? How do they promote learning? Student involvement. So how much time do we spend as a teacher actually talking, and how much time do the students spend talking? That should change from class to class. And it should always be the case that students are talking for more of the class. And then we have the spatial organization in the classroom as well. So so oftentimes, I know in Moore Hall, you'll see all the desks around in the U shape against the wall. And so that's one way of organizing classrooms. It's also useful to organize people into groups. And there's something to be said too about the typical having students, the desks lined up in rows kind of too. I mean, different learners will respond to different organizations. So I think it's good to have those different methods there. So making tasks interesting. So beyond varying them, we can also do all of these things too, so we can make them challenging. We want to make them so that they're not too easy but not too hard. Okay, so it should actually be just within reach of the learners. They should be able to accomplish the task with what they have, but it should take some effort to do so. We need to make sure that the content is interesting, so find out what the learners are actually interested in, what their hobbies are, and kind of try and make the content related to that. It's not always possible, but you can actually, for the most part, try and do that. And I think I've done that in the past, and it's pretty easy. It's not easy, but it's You'd be surprised what your learners are interested in and how well it connects to what the curriculum wants you to do. Make activities that introduce new or unexpected elements. Yeah, so make sure that every once in a while you might want to have an activity that includes something in it that you've never done before. So maybe make a new game or something like that. That's always useful. Incorporate activities with ambiguous, open-ended, or paradoxical elements. Yeah, so here you have, you want to include activities that make students think. Okay, so things like discussion questions for one thing. I remember I had a class that I taught on writing and content for an ESL group. And at that point, they had to read a novel, and so I gave them discussion questions where they had to figure out like the symbology, the symbolism and the themes in the novel. Which anybody who's ever taken an English class should know, like a lot of things are open to interpretation. And so it actually ends up making it so the students, they don't have the answer in front of them. They can't provide like a 1 or 2 word answer. They have to actually provide a lot more detail and explain their reasoning. So that gets them a lot more involved. Paradoxical elements, so things that go together but shouldn't, it makes it so students have to like work together to like reduce that discrepancy there. And so that gets them interested. Incorporate information about new people or cultural elements. So yeah, this is just like novelty. If they haven't seen this stuff before, they're going to be really interested in it. A lot of learners to use their imaginations. Yeah, so the more people can use their imaginations, the more interested they generally are. So this can be seen in things like role plays and things, which also connects to humor at the bottom there. So yeah, if you have imaginations, students can often make these role plays that are fun, and they can have a lot of fun with them and make them funny and entertaining for everybody involved. Yeah, so connect the tasks to real people and their lives. Yeah, so have friendly competition. Make it so that but if you're going to have competition, yeah, so one thing that you need to make sure is that it's not taken seriously. So those who lose should just kind of like brush it off and be like, oh, well, that was fun. So the activity itself should just be for fun, and not something that like makes it so people lose face in essence. And then finally, so the final project should be tangible. Okay, so without a final project that students can actually see at the end, it makes it so it's not as interesting. They like to see some sort of outcome from their tasks. Okay, student involvement. Yeah, so require mental or bodily involvement from each participant. So this is really helpful. So some of you might have heard like TPR, total physical response. I know when I took German a while ago, I had to, the first like few weeks of class involved us learning verbs by actually doing them in class. We kind of made it a little bit more fun, and I still remember those verbs because I actually had to act them out. So it was kind of a 2-for-1 deal. And then you had, let's see, assign specific roles and personalized assignments for students. These are really helpful. So for instance, going back to that, my example for the discussion groups with the questions in the, where they had to look for the symbols and themes in the novel, they were assigned specific roles for those groups. So some of them were like the discussion leader, somebody was the reporter, somebody was in charge of like developing vocabulary questions. The idea here is that each student has a specific role, and so because of that specific role, the others are counting on them to get the full experience. Okay, so this goes back to cooperative learning, which we've talked about extensively, and we'll talk a little bit more about later, but I mean, we're not going to go into a lot of detail with that again. And then, yeah, another example for student involvement. So something that I like to try and do in my language classes is to provide sticky notes for class discussions. And so this kind of makes it so the students, it's almost like hot potato in a sense, so you have to toss this around, but it's like with sticky notes. So each of the learners, I give them like 2 or 3 sticky notes, and for each time that they contribute to the discussion, they make a meaningful contribution, they lose a sticky note. Okay, so the goal is to get rid of all the sticky notes by the end of the class, and so it makes it so that they want to participate more, and it makes it so they pay attention more, so they can know when to say something. So those types of tricks are all really useful, and they get the students to really get involved, and take more control of what they're doing in class. The way we present tasks and how we administer them is just as important as the tasks themselves. So Dornay actually talks about these 3 different things that we need to consider with instructions. So we need to explain the purpose and the utility of the task. We need to what the student's anticipation, and then we need to provide strategies for accomplishing the task. Yeah, so explaining the purpose and use. So a lot of you are probably familiar with times when your teacher said, just do this, and didn't really explain why. I'm sure I've done that in the past as a teacher. It's not something we always think about. But basically, the idea here is that school is not the same as a military academy. So in the Army, you're expected to do everything you're told without asking. In school, it's not the case. You want to know why you're doing something. Okay, so we want to emphasize that the task is a learning opportunity. We want to tell them that this will help them some way. Explain how the task fits in with the big picture of the course. So a lot of times students know the curriculum ahead of time, so we want to know how that task will help to fulfill those curricular objectives. And then, yeah, so describe the intended purpose. So why are they doing the task? And then make connections to the students' daily lives. Okay, we want to whet the students' appetite, so we want to be enthusiastic and excited about the task when you present it to the students. And you want to ask them to make guesses and predictions, possibly. Point out challenging aspects that they might come across, and then add a twist to the routine or activities. You don't have to do all these things, but like it's good to have a combination of at least use more than one. And then you want to provide them some strategies. Okay, so something I think is really important is the second bullet point there. So never explain, but demonstrate. So it's better to actually demonstrate to the students what they need to do. Otherwise, you spend a lot more time than you want actually explaining the instructions and what they need to do. By demonstrating it, they actually see it happening, so they know how to proceed. Okay, so you can also have them brainstorm a list of strategies before starting. Yeah, and always spend a little bit longer demonstrating the task. Believe me, it's a major help in the end. Okay, so then this brings us to ideas of like setting specific goals. Okay, so with goal setting theory, we talk about a lot. We've talked about it a lot this semester, and I think the key here is that it's very motivating for students to be able to come back to these goals that they've set for themselves. Okay, so we need proximal goals to maintain motivation. So these help the learners, as we've said in the past, they help them to kind of gauge their progress as they're going along and know where they are, and to adjust their trajectory a little bit if needed. So, I mean, a lot of times we have some of these already built into the course. So we have tests and projects, so it's more like official events, but learners need to come up with their own goals as well. Okay, so the tests and projects are they provide a chance for students to assess themselves in terms of their progress. But if they can come up with other goals on their own, then that's going to provide even more opportunities for them to adjust their path. So there's several steps. So we have them clearly define the goal that they have. So what's their overall achievement? What are they expecting to get out of all of this? Where do they want to go with this? How do they reach that goal? So when we talk about clearly defining goals, we're talking about distal goals. We talk about the list of steps to reach the goal. We're thinking about proximal goals. Okay, and then we think of problems that may interfere, and then the solutions to those problems. So this is, as we said, this is not always easy to do. And you can't anticipate every single problem, of course. So having them actually think about it in a general sense, at least, would be helpful. And then you want them to set a timeline. So you want to see, like, what's the action plan? How are they going to keep progressing over the course of a semester or a year? And then evaluate the progress over time, and then reward give some sort of reward for meeting certain progress points. Okay. So something to keep in mind. So when we help students set their goals, the goals should be clear and specific. So for instance, even like this is useful for a number of things. So even for like your proposals, for instance, they need to be clear and specific so that you know what to do once you get to like writing and everything. And something else, so they should be measurable. So yeah, students need to be able to, if you're going to assess goals, they need to be something that you can actually observe. Okay, so you make sure that the students have something that they've determined is, make sure that students, when they make their goals, that they can actually observe how well they are meeting those goals. They should be challenging and difficult, but not too difficult or not too challenging. And they should be realistic. Okay, so they should be within reach. Yeah, so they should all have stated completion dates. So you should give yourself a deadline, or your students should give themselves a deadline. And you should have both short and long-term goals, as I've said, and then feedback should be provided. Okay. Some things that you can do as a teacher specifically, so you can have students walk through these steps and like make sure that they have these different characteristics for their goals. And you can do this by like having goal setting conferences periodically with them. And this is time consuming, but it's really worth it, at least to do it once. Or you can give students potential goals like based on what you're learning about in class, and kind of have them pick ones that they want to achieve, or enter into learning contracts with them. So have learners draw up some sort of a contract, and then you guys sit down and determine. So you both sign it, and you say, okay, so by the end of the semester, or by the end of this unit, you have to have achieved this. Okay, so that's all really useful for motivating students. These goals help them to actually know where they need to head off in. Okay, yeah, and it helps them to have more of a sense of like owning up to their own learning. Okay. Another thing, so building confidence. Yeah, so this is easier said than done, and there's a lot. It's because there's a lot of different things that come into play here. So it's linked to self-esteem, self-efficacy, and anxiety. So learners have to have a high sense of self-worth, and they also have to have outside influences that are aiding this, aiding their confidence. Okay, so a lot of times we'll see like face-saving practices where students don't actually put the effort in that they need to in order to say, oh, well, I didn't put in the effort, rather than to say, oh, I'm not. So rather than, okay, so if they actually like fail something, they can blame it on lack of effort instead of lack of ability. Okay, so so going back to like self-attribution theory. Okay, so if they think that if they can attribute it to something that's not innate, for instance, it's more likely to be face-saving. Okay, so in order to build confidence, we have 4 main strategies that we use. Okay, so we can either provide experiences of success to learners, we can encourage learners, we can reduce language anxiety, and we can teach strategies. Okay, so one thing that we can do, so we can provide success experiences. So here is like success breeds success, and so we can create multiple opportunities for students to demonstrate success by giving them some like maybe slightly easier activities, so things that we would actually expect them to do well on to start off with. So kind of like wetting your feet in a sense. So you want to make sure that they feel comfortable with whatever you're talking about. So that's why we talk about like starting new units or topics with tasks that people can easily that are easily accessible to people. And then as we move on to more demanding tasks, we want to actually counterbalance those with other more manageable ones. So you want to have a give and take here. So you want them to do demanding tasks to achieve like to go, according to socioculture theory, to step beyond their step into their zone of proximal development and continue to develop. But you want to make sure that they also feel confident in being able to develop. So by giving them the manageable tasks as well as the demanding tasks, it offsets any uncertainty that there might be. Okay, and also you want to treat performance with confidentiality. So that goes for good and poor performance. You don't want to point out to everybody that student A did excellently and outperformed pretty much everybody in class. And you definitely don't want to point out that student B did like significantly worse or failed, was the only one that failed, for instance. That would be really bad, and it would actually make it so that it would make for a lower self-efficacy in the long run. Okay, so make sure that the opportunities are there for students to actually be successful. Okay. We want to encourage learners. So yeah, so the idea is self-esteem and self-confidence are social products. So you want to give learners the opinions of your opinion of their ability. Okay, so you want to say that you want to tell them positively that they can do it. Okay, this provides reinforcement for them and that helps to bolster that sense of self-esteem and self-confidence. And it's really important because some students need more encouragement than others. So while some students may not need any encouragement, those who have particular doubts about their abilities will need a lot more encouragement. Otherwise, they won't feel that they can achieve whatever the task, the end goal of the task that they have before them. Okay, so encouraging learners helps to build confidence. You want to reduce anxiety to build confidence. And so, yeah, so some of the things, so eliminate social comparison. So going back to keeping things confidential, you don't want to have students working against each other related to competition again. So you want to make sure the competition, if you do have competition, that it's not overly serious. Okay, so for instance, doing a review activity where you have teams working with each other, that would be a fun activity. But having students actually in competition for, say, you say, okay, well, student, whoever gets the best grade on this next test gets extra credit. It's high stakes for everybody, and you know whoever is already, and you know that there's going to be a lot of people who are sore losers about it too. And not that they're sore losers, it's just that they don't necessarily, they'll feel awful about themselves. You want to nurture an environment where mistakes are actually okay. So you want to tell students from the start that mistakes are part of the learning process. Okay, so you don't want them to be afraid to make mistakes, and you don't want to just constantly be fixing their mistakes either. Okay, so if you fix their mistakes, it's going to make them self-doubt and it's going to make them more anxious to actually contribute in class. So that's something you want to avoid. It's okay to fix some mistakes, but be selective. Okay, so if you're fixing every other word that the student is saying, it's going to make them give up, right? So you want to tell them that mistakes are part of a learning experience, and that if they make mistakes, that's fine. That you might point them out, but you might not also. Okay, and then tests and assessment. We want to make sure that they are fair. We want to make sure that students are warned about them and given ample opportunities to review or have some sort of idea what's going to be on them. And we want to make sure that if we don't think that a student legitimately performed up to their ability, we want to give them the chance to prove themselves. Okay. So there's that. So all of that kind of comes together to reduce anxiety and to make the learner more confident. And then we also want to teach learning strategies, okay? So we want to have them, so these are just learning techniques that they can use, and communication strategies. And so basically things like when you don't know a word, what can you do to make yourself work better? So you can talk around the word to kind of figure out, to describe it to the learner, to the listener, for instance. yeah, so just getting your students to be comfortable with the fact that not everything's going to be certain, and knowing how to approach situations in which they're not sure how to respond. It's really helpful for it gives them these tools that they can draw on later on, so that they can actually be competent in their interactions. Okay. Okay. So another thing, this is especially important when it comes to adolescents, but it's also, I mean, it's important for adults as well, and younger children. But maintaining a positive social image among your peers is also something that you want to you want to be able to make it so that they can actually do that. Okay. So academic achievement impacts academic and social development. Okay, so that can have, so I mean, depending on the environment. So some people may view people who perform poorly all the time academically as being awful people, I guess. Or they might view people who are overly academic as being like nerds, for instance. It depends on the environment overall, but I mean, just know that academic achievement, either good or bad, can have impacts on both of these areas. Okay, so yeah, so failure in a subject can cause personal disappointment and public embarrassment. So we want to be careful and avoid that as much as possible. And so some of the things that we should do, we want to create participation for good roles. Okay, so so basically we want to have like L2 related things that we do. So performing fun role plays, for instance, or having people do realistic tasks in their L2, making them practice it more. We can also just relate it to certain class related things, like asking somebody to close the door, or I think like fix a blind was an example in the text. Okay, some things that we should not do. Okay, so these are things that will like negatively affect social image. We want to avoid criticizing and correcting students, and especially when that's viewed as being humiliating. Okay, so we don't want to like laugh at anybody for their mistakes. We don't want to put them on the spot with their criticisms and single them out. Often when we think about criticisms or corrections, if we're going to do that, we want to do it globally. Okay, so we want to make sure that the learners, it's not that we can't correct, it's more so that we want to do it so that we look at patterns among learners and we kind of address the class as a whole and the patterns that we notice there. Okay, so instead of saying like, Jason, you're doing this wrong, you could say, I noticed this pattern of like people using the incorrect tense, and so I wanted to correct it. Okay. We also want to avoid putting learners in the spotlight unexpectedly. So this involves both criticism and corrections and like asking questions. So I mean, if somebody appears to not know or doesn't want to, or is scared to respond, you don't want to call that person specifically and say, okay, respond now. It actually kind of startles them and makes it so that a lot of times it will make it so they don't know what to answer, even though they might know the answer. Okay, so things like organized participation is really helpful there. So making it so that learners know exactly when it's going to be their turn. And then avoiding disciplining students in ways seen as humiliating. So this goes back to criticisms and corrections. So you don't want to point out one student in front of everybody else. It's going to come across as being bad, and it's going to affect the way others view them. Okay. Okay, yeah, so cooperative learning. So we've already talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. Some of the things that it does, though. So here, just a review. So it fosters cohesiveness among the group. So they have to work together towards a common goal. Obviously, they're going to be a little bit more, I guess, cohesive. Yeah, so they're going to want to work together more. It increases expectancy of success. So instead of being relying on just one person, it relies on everybody in the group. Okay, it allows for the synthesis of academic and social goals. So one person may have more social goals, another person may have more academic goals, but because they're in the same group, it kind of all becomes a wash. Okay, so they kind of combine together. So everybody's working towards these same goals. Okay. And then the mutual sense of obligation and responsibility. So learners can actually push others to contribute their share in the group. Unique contributions are necessary for success. So basically, everybody needs to contribute somehow to the group for it to be successful. It's more positive in tone. It's autonomous. So learners are actually pushed towards taking control of their own learning. The greater satisfaction. And that comes from celebrating afterwards. So if you succeed, then your group will all be happy with the success, and so you can all celebrate together. And then you can emphasize the importance of effort relevant to ability. Okay, so the group didn't. So the idea here is that the group will have succeeded not because their ability, because everybody's going to have different levels of ability in the group. So the idea here is that the group itself put effort into this task, and because of that effort, they succeeded. Okay, so the idea here is that it gets learners to view that effort is actually more important than innate ability. So something that we often see erroneously mentioned as like a way, as something that controls language learning, when it's not always the case. So going back to autonomy then. So something that they mentioned, so autonomy kind of prepares learners in spite of the education they've received. It's kind of funny, I think, to mention that just because of like the way curriculum is going, especially in like public schools, we have this focus on testing. And so if learners really want to be prepared, they have to almost take control of it and like learn themselves on the side. So it's kind of funny and sad at the same time. But basically what we can do is we can develop autonomy in the learners by doing these different things. So we can give them choices. So we can say like, here's a few options that you can do. What do you want to, which of these will best suit you? Okay. We want to give learners authority. So provide them with specific roles that they can contribute, so they can contribute into different groups. Encourage student contributions and peer teaching. So yeah, so having students actually teach a specific section of a chapter, for instance, can be actually really motivating for them. And it can actually be really fun. And then we have, yeah, so encouraging project work, so having students work together or on their own to create like a big final product so that they can show to others that will most likely be tailored towards some interest of theirs. And then we have self-assessment, so allowing learners to like kind of think through how they actually view themselves and their progress so far. So this kind of leads to kind of what we do now. So we have this push towards learner-centeredness in the classroom rather than teacher-centeredness. And so basically, through that learner-centeredness, we create autonomy. So as a teacher, rather than being like the controller or the authoritarian in the classroom, we want to be the facilitator. So we want to push the learners to actually work together or figure out things on their own. And then we can kind of provide guidance as we see fit. Or we can actually allow them to make their own mistakes and learn from those mistakes as we go forward. Okay. Yeah, so something important to mention. So if you want a fully autonomous class, there will be conflict between the teacher and the students, okay? Or from between the students and the students. And this is just part of like the give and take that's going on in the classroom. And so I think it's something that's it's a necessary problem that you'll have to deal with if you want to, and you should, make it so that you incorporate aspects of autonomy. And it's something you should be comfortable with happening too. There's no way you're going to be completely There's no way you'll be able to ever completely anticipate it or eliminate it. But you should make sure that you don't make it so that you as the teacher stamp your foot down and start to take over after that happens. Okay, so it's important to just kind of let it run its course and to let things come into equilibrium on their own. Okay, and then this is the final part. So in addition to all these things that we as teachers can do, we can also encourage students to motivate themselves by having them do these different self-motivating strategies. So here we have like the commitment control strategies. So keeping in mind a favorable expectancy, keeping in mind favorable expectancies and rewards. So basically the future self or the ideal L2 self would come into play here. So having students actually think about where they want to be in the future and what emotions they associate with that and whatnot. And then on the flip side, having them consider their feared self. So what are the results of failed intentions? And then we want to teach them metacognitive control strategies as well. So these are conscious strategies that they actually apply. So they can be things like self-reminders to concentrate or of deadlines that are coming up. They can imagine consequences. So once again, going back kind of to the feared self. Ignoring attractive alternatives and identifying recurring distractions. Cutting short procrastination, so like getting off Facebook or Instagram or whatnot. And then using starter rituals. So things like you sit down and you spend some time doing certain things for like 10 minutes or so before you actually get started. Okay, so it becomes like a habit that you do every day. And then we have satiation control strategies. So we have so these are meant to add extra spice to the learning task. They make it more interesting. So you can add twists or you can treat a task like a game. So going back to the beginning when we were talking about that. One thing that you can do here is you can encourage students to kind of encourage themselves to try to set records almost for themselves. So that kind of make it a game. You can also change the way that where you're doing a task, so the context, or increase the rhythm or the pace, things like that. Emotion control strategies. So having students, giving students the ability to actually think about what emotions are preventing them from achieving a task. So are they having negative emotions, and how do they, and telling them to consider those and push them aside. So students can actually generate diversions to do that, so they can think about something positive. They can provide themselves with self-affirmation or self-encouragement, so they can tell themselves how great they are or that they can do something. They can construct positive narratives, so they can think about things that happened in the past maybe and tell that story to themselves, or make predictions and tell that story. They can meditate to calm down, or they can count to 10. All these kind of take your mind off of the emotions, the negative emotions that come up and affect your ability to perform. And then we have environmental control strategies. So we want to eliminate negative environmental influences and exploit the positive. So we want to have we want to eliminate interference in terms of noise or whatnot around you, or temptations. So if you're trying to work on a worksheet and you have Facebook in front of you, you want to eliminate Facebook by putting your computer away, basically. Okay, so some of the things that students can do here is to organize study groups. They can make promises out loud of what they'll accomplish. They can reach a point of no return. So they can actually agree to have something done by a certain amount of time to an authority figure, for instance, and then at that point they can't change it anymore, so they have to get it done. And they can ask friends to hold them accountable. Okay. And so, I mean, we have all these strategies that we can train learners in, and so something that we need to do is to have a way of training them. And so when we look at these, when we look at this then, so there's like several steps that we want to apply. So first of all, we want to kind of discover, so which strategies do students already use? So knowing what they already use makes it so that we can save a lot of time in terms of training them in terms of which strategy they need to still work on. And then once we already know that, then we can figure out what the new strategies are that they should learn. So we can suggest and then actually model. So going back to demonstrating. So don't just explain, but demonstrate the new strategies. Provide a rationale for it. So explain why this is a good strategy. What does it help you to accomplish? Provide guided exercises or experiences. So allow them to practice using the strategies, and have them develop their own strategies too over time. So I mean, that's something that they may not be able to do in class, but it's something that you can encourage them to do as situations where strategies are needed arise. Okay, and then organize. So after they've had some time to develop their own strategies, you can organize sharing sessions for them to do that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the lecture, and so the main thing that you'll need to do, so we have spring break next week. The main thing that you'll need to do, and I'll post this because I forgot to put it in a slide on this lecture, but you'll need to read the 3 articles for after break. Okay, so we'll be talking about demotivation. And you'll need to, so for this week, you'll need to participate in the discussion. So the discussion, and then you'll also have 2 weeks to complete the so you have this week, spring break, and then the following week to complete the lesson plan assignment. And then after that, you also for this week have I will be uploading the details on the like a video detailing the assignments for the final project, and I'll have like a discussion board after that too for any questions you might have. So review that. I think that's it. If there's something I'm forgetting, then it will end up being on the course website, so you'll easily be able to find it. And I can send an email out to let you know if there was anything. Okay, so in the meantime, just continue working on your final projects. Make sure the Skype to set up. Oh yeah, and the Skype sign up. Make sure that you sign up for Skype time. That's another assignment for this week. And after that, have a good spring break, and we'll be back in 2 weeks from now.